by BBC Breakfast suggests that survivors of domestic violence are facing intimidation when their cases are heard in the family court. Many have come face to face with their abusive ex-partner.
The charity Women's Aid says the process can be a major source of fear for some women. The government says it's consulting on a bill which will tackle the issue. Satchel has more.
Isabel's relationship with her husband started to go wrong after the birth of her daughter, Olivia. She says he became jealous, angry, abusive. We've changed both names and revoiced their words to protect their identities.
He started getting very, very angry. He'd give me a tiny bit of money a month for everything. So in the end, I ended up selling most of my things on eBay and eating cereal just so the children had something to eat. I realised that he couldn't hurt me anymore. I was pretty much a shell. There was nothing left in me really. So he started on the children. They were really terrified of him.
He would start getting more angry and violent and stuff. And I just remember crying in the corner because I was so afraid. After him shouting at me for 10 minutes.
You were afraid of him?
Terrified, yeah.
After years of abuse, Isabel finally left her husband. The police investigated but said it was her word against his and there was no prosecution. The case ended up at the family court where eventually a judge decided Isabel's ex-husband should have contact with the children.
He came to pick her up and she refused to go. She said, "I don't want to see you today," and he physically picked her up from the front door with her kicking and screaming and put her in the car, slammed the door shut and drove off with her. So it was traumatic for her. It was traumatic for me.
I didn't want to see my dad at all. The last thing I wanted to do was see my dad. So I just wanted to have a voice in this whole thing, which obviously didn't happen.
You don't feel as though you were listened to?
No.
Her brother said, "I hate judges. I hate the courts. Why are they forcing us to see Daddy when he's being so horrible to us? Why can't they see this? Why do they not believe us?"
New rules were introduced to the family court last year to ensure the safety of children involved in domestic abuse. But in a study of 72 cases, the charity Women's Aid found that 24% of domestic abuse survivors said they'd been cross-examined by their ex-partner in court, and 61% said there were no special measures in place, like separate waiting rooms or screens, to protect them. Isabel says the family court is not doing enough, and things need to change.
I think it takes a lot for domestic abuse survivors to come forward and say this is what's happening to me, and they really need to be believed. They're really hoping that the court will protect you and your children, and I don't think that's happening at all at the moment.
Olivia no longer sees her father. The most recent court order said she was now old enough to make her own decisions. The government says it's for judges to determine what's best for the child in each case, and it is reforming the law to protect victims and bring more offenders to justice. But campaigners say too often children's safety is put at risk because survivors of abuse are not believed. Graham Satchel, BBC News.
Let's talk more about this now, joined by Sian Hawkins from Women's Aid, who can tell us a bit more about the research. First of all, just reflecting on the voices we heard here just then, identities, of course, kept secret, but it does bring home people have already been through an ordeal, and then it can be made almost worse by the process that they have to go through.
Yeah, absolutely. We know from the survivors of domestic abuse that we work with every day at Women's Aid that they often feel that the family court process itself and the setting of the family court isn't keeping them safe, that actually they often end up feeling more traumatised and more victimised after going through the court process, which is fundamentally there to keep them and their children safe. So, it's really time now for urgent action on this from the government.
What specifically do you want to see done, say, in terms of the family court, like the experience from, I suppose, before you enter the door to while you're inside?
Well, there's two key things that we think that can be done fairly simply and easily. The first is around access to special measures. So, for example, when you're going through the criminal court process as a victim of domestic abuse, you would have a separate entrance, a separate waiting room, video links, screens, anything there to keep you safe. In the family courts, that's often not available. It's very patchy and inconsistent between different courts, and there's no guarantee whatsoever you would be protected in that way.
There have been efforts, though, made in many of the family courts. You say it's patchy, but the efforts have been recognised, or the need for effort has been recognised.
Yeah, absolutely. The government and the family judiciary have shown willing in this area, absolutely. But what we're still hearing from day who are going through these processes is that they feel incredibly unsafe through these processes. And in the research that we're launching today, we found that a quarter of women going through the family court have actually been directly cross-examined by the perpetrator of domestic abuse against them. And as you can imagine, that is just so incredibly traumatic and upsetting, and really means that the court isn't getting the full picture of what's happening in that family, because the ability of that victim to give evidence properly when they're being cross-examined by the perpetrator is incredibly diminished. So we're really calling now for legislation in that area to come forward. It was drafted at the beginning of last year. It was in another bill which fell before the snap election, but there's no reason now to stall on that legislation any further.
Can I just ask now, given the testimony we heard and what you've said about what the impact can be like, where are the rights of the other party in this, the person who's accused? How do you, whilst you accept that it could potentially be devastating for them to be in that situation, to have to be cross-examined, for example, how do you at the same time make sure that the other party involved does get represented properly?
Well, what the family courts is there to do in relationship breakdown cases is to protect the best interest of the child, and that is at the very heart, at the very core of all of these cases. So really that's what the family courts are set up to do. So ideally both parties would have formal legal representation, but because of changes to the legal aid regulations, very often now at least one party in a family court case will be unrepresented. So ideally we want both parties represented so that both parties can give evidence and feel that they've had their day in court and justice has been done.
Then you would possibly avoid some of the almost the very personal adversarial element that happens within the courtroom, for example.
Yeah, in the criminal courts, for example, again, you would absolutely never have a situation where a perpetrator of a crime would be cross-examining the victim. So what we're saying is that there needs to be parity between those different court systems, and that in the family courts, that's still not acceptable, and that's still not going to help any case come to justice or any judge actually be able to make a sensible decision about that child's safety.
Sian, thank you very much. Sian Hawkins from Women's Aid involved in the research. It's worth saying the government has said it's already set out measures to better protect victims of domestic abuse and will ban the practice of abusers cross-examining their victims as soon as possible.
Yeah, and on the issue of presumed contact, the Ministry of Justice says that it is up to judges to determine what's best for each child after careful consideration of the facts.
8:45 is the time.